It is a device of torture. In the 21st century, if they were using torture to extract things, you could use mesh.
My husband has turned into my carer, and he's so much less of my husband. We can't have sex. We haven't had sex for 4.5 years.
I am registered disabled and I have no control over my bowel or my bladder, so I'm just terrified.
He examined me and he could actually see the tape was come through my vagina, so it was actually all the way through and protruding through.
So this is a vaginal mesh. It's used when women have a prolapse or bladder incontinence, normally brought on by childbirth, and it's often made from polypropylene. That's the same material used to make this kind of drinks bottle.
Tens of thousands of women in the UK have had one, but this programme has learnt that more than 800 of them are now taking legal action against the NHS and the manufacturers, because this innocuous-looking piece of mesh can erode, disintegrate, and lead to life-changing pain and distress. The simple procedure could end up costing the health service tens of millions of pounds in compensation, and some want to see it banned on the NHS completely.
It has completely changed my life. I am registered disabled. I'm doubly incontinent and I have no control over my bowel or my bladder, so I'm just terrified that I go out and I've had accidents and it's not pretty. I'll not leave the house until I know my bowel is empty.
Karen, let me ask you about the impact on you of having this mesh.
So I've got extensive nerve damage in my left leg, in my foot, my hip. I'm double incontinent, so that's bowel and bladder. I've got depression, severe, that I've had to go and see an emergency counsellor, and I've got fibromyalgia. I'm seeing a physiotherapist to keep my joints moving because they're seizing up, because the pain is just so severe some days that it's easier to just stay in bed, but that's not conducive with keeping yourself healthy. But it never ends. You know, I never foresaw that having a 40-minute procedure twice would be this devastating. I just didn't.
Vaginal meshes are designed to be permanent. They're used to treat either prolapse or bladder incontinence. The mesh effectively acts like a sling or hammock, holding up the internal pelvic organs in the case of a prolapse, or supporting the urethra or bladder neck in the case of bladder incontinence. Whilst they work for the majority of women, when they go wrong, they can be difficult to remove.
The other one has a different shape.
Dr. Mark Slack is a surgeon who fits some type of mesh implants.
This is a model of a female pelvis. This is the bony pelvis, and these are a model representation of the organs of the bladder, the uterus, and the bowel at the back.
This is much smaller than the natural pelvis, obviously.
This is less than a quarter of the size of a normal adult human pelvis.
And this is to scale, this is it.
This is to scale. So it's made long enough to be able to go from the vagina out through the abdominal wall. And it goes in behind the pelvis here, on either side of the bladder neck, into a space where there are no major organs, and then comes out through the skin and taken right out, and then the tape is cut off, leaving the tape forming a hammock underneath the neck of the bladder.
My reality was absolutely fantastic for the first 3 years. And then I began to have what felt like period pains, but very intense period pains that would go on for days and weeks and weeks. And I was re-referred back to my gynaecologist, who said it must be your womb. I had a full abdominal hysterectomy to try and rectify my pain, and of course I still had it there after that. So I lost my womb for no reason when I was 39.
So what did you think it was then?
I went to see my GP after I had my hysterectomy and I said that I was still in pain. And he looked at me square in the face and he said, Claire, we've had you out on an operating table. There is nothing there to see. You are depressed.
Wow. How did that make you feel?
I got back in my car and I phoned my husband and I said, I can't live anymore. I can't go through this. I actually do think I'm believing the doctors. I think it's in my head.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't know where else to turn.
Can I ask, did you have any suicidal thoughts? You did?
Yeah.
Gosh.
I planned it. I mapped it out. And, having children, something I think just kicked in. I'm very lucky that something kicked in.
I've had over 53 admissions. Over the last 5 years, I counted actually.
Because you're in pain?
Because of agonising pain, I can feel like something really sharp every time I walk. It almost feels like something sharp is inside me, and I couldn't understand what it was. So I went back I had an appointment coming up to see a surgeon anyway. He examined me and he could actually see the tape was come through my vagina, so it was actually all the way through and protruding through. So they said, right.
And when you say tape, we're talking about the mesh implants, yes?
Yeah, so that piece of that had actually worked its way, which was this erosion thing, it worked its way through and come out the other side.
Gosh. What was the reality then?
My husband has turned into my carer and he's so much less of my husband. We can't have sex. We haven't had sex for 4.5 years. We can attempt it at times because he's a 45-year-old man. This stuff breaks up marriages, why wouldn't it? It's cause for divorce, not having sexual relations with your partner.
Imagine a hedgehog covered in chilli sauce is as bad as it is. So when people say, why can't you have sex after a mesh implant? The burning is so intense, that's how it feels, to the point where I couldn't even use a tampon during my periods because the burning, that would exacerbate the burning, but also that would then send shooting pains down my legs. And then interestingly, once I'd had the mesh removed, within 3 days of removal, all that burning has gone.
It's like being mutilated.
It is. It's barbaric. That's the only way to describe it, really.
It slices through the wall.
Yeah.
So when women are having sex, sometimes their partners are being injured during sex because it's cutting through the wall. It's that severe.
We've learned that one of the leading manufacturers of mesh, Ethicon, a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson, knew about problems over 10 years ago. I want to read you this. This is an email from 2004. This is not going to go away anytime soon, and the competition will have a field day. Major damage control offensive needs to start to educate the reps and the surgeons. 2004, they realised, according to this email, there's a problem. What do you think of that?
Horrendous.
It's outrageous that they're harming women and they know about it and they don't care.
How can they do this to women? How can they do it in this day and age?
5 years ago in the United States, senior executives at Ethicon, the Johnson & Johnson subsidiary, were cross-examined as part of a civil lawsuit against the manufacturer, and it became clear they knew that once implanted in women, mesh could contract and disintegrate.
Product requirement 5 was that the mesh must not shrink, but on the other hand, you knew that shrinkage was going to happen and the mesh would shrink, correct?
Yes.
Are you aware that their erosion rate at 1 year in the TVM study, if you counted all the exposures of mesh into the vagina that occurred, as of 1 year, it was 20.7% of the women?
Yes, I am aware of that.
And it's your testimony to this jury that that's acceptable to you, that the top surgeons in the world, the very best, had a 20.7% erosion rate at 1 year. Yes or no? That's acceptable to you?
100%.
Is that acceptable to you?
Yes.
No. He's just arrogance.
He's just dismissing the fact that it's
20%, 25% doesn't really matter. If I met him, I would ask him, would he put it in his wife, his mother, his sister, his niece? When he knows the shrinkage And he's totally dismissed it, honest to God.
I don't think I could say anything polite. I think I'm just so angry that people like him just dismiss it as a number. And I'm not just a number. I'm somebody's partner, I'm somebody's mum, somebody's sister. And all these people are impacted on it.
You knew it could lead to erosion, correct?
Yes.
You knew it could lead to dyspareunia, correct?
Dyspareunia.
Yes.
He's just ticking a checklist.
You knew that it could lead to the need to have subsequent invasive operations to try to either
Please don't say
remove
yes.
or revise that contracted mesh, correct?
Yes.
The ProLift itself, as packaged and marketed,
He's sitting with his finger on his head going, yes, 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 yes. And I'm hoping that he's going to say no. And he doesn't. And he's just downplaying what we've
been through. Aye. They knew it.
2012 was 2 years from my first implantation. So when he was saying all this, I was at a surgeon begging for him to remove it.
Ethicon, subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson, the biggest manufacturer of vaginal meshes, also tell us that they are no longer marketing these meshes for prolapses.
Well, the doctors are still performing them day in, day out.
I would like to implant it in one of them and let them feel this pain. Nobody should have to suffer this.
Dr. Sophia El-Neil is a surgeon many women turn to try and remove the mesh.
I tend to see patients who have suffered complications and long-term complications as a result of these materials, and you will be aware that many of them have had either prolapse or continence mesh put in to help with their symptoms originally. And then some of them have developed problems very soon afterwards, but a lot of them have developed problems several years down the line.
Like what?
So the typical type of patient I see is a patient who's incapacitated by severe pain of a chronic nature. Often they're on high dose medication, including opiates. They become so incapacitated that many of them are either walking by crutches or sitting in wheelchairs, and perhaps more dramatically so, they become unable to look after their families. Many will give up work, and some of them will lose their partners and have...
Because relationships break down.
Yes. And it becomes extremely difficult to manage their life as a whole.
Vaginal meshes are still being used by surgeons up and down the country, and there are something like 100 different types on the market. And to get them approved for clinical use, it's really easy.
So in Europe and America, it does need to be approved, but it doesn't need any evidence when it gets approved because it can use other devices, what's called equivalence, to say my device is the same as yours, so I'd like approval please. And what happens is the regulatory body says no problem, you can have approval.
Do you believe the NHS should stop using these meshes?
I do believe they should stop using these meshes, and if people want to come back and say I'm going to innovate, develop, then they have to do that in the context of research, as opposed to using human beings over a 15-year life cycle now. This has been going on since 2000, and using them as experiments, when actually here you should be saying, honestly, we are able to tell you, here's a device, here's the benefit, here's the long-term harms. If you can't say that, you shouldn't make it available.
So far, not one single model of mesh has been recalled in this country. Many of the women we've spoken to say they were never told by their surgeons about the potential risks associated with vaginal meshes.
Do you tell women about the potential medium to long-term problems? That the mesh can erode into the vagina, that the mesh can disintegrate, that the mesh can make having sex so painful that actually that woman can never have sex again?
We have a patient information leaflet. It's got all the complications. We divide them into common, very common, uncommon. We give examples of what common mean in terms of numbers.
Right, but do you have those conversations?
Yes, we do. So we've got an information leaflet.
No, but do you have conversations?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
For many women, this is a really good procedure. For some women, it's a pretty horrific procedure. It has a massive impact on their life. in a very detrimental way.
I have enormous sympathy for the patients who really have severe pain. And I have.
Is it worth it then?
Not for that group. Is it worth it for all the patients? It's difficult to say.
Would you carry out a mesh implant procedure on your wife?
For incontinence, yes.
Even though it goes wrong for some women?
Yes, because the, well, in fact, it would very much be my wife's decision on whether or not she would actually undergo such an implant.
What about for prolapse? You would let your wife have one of those?
Yes, for
a prolapse?
Of that, yes.
The UK regulatory body, the MHRA, says for most women, the use of vaginal mesh implants is safe and effective. A recent review in Scotland said mesh implants shouldn't be routinely used for pelvic organ prolapse, but critics called it a whitewash. A separate review is underway in England and Wales.
In the States, thousands of women have sued manufacturers, receiving payouts that total around $2 billion. In the UK, we've obtained NHS data which suggests around 100,000 women have had the implants, and almost 9% of those women reported problems. But the true figure could be even higher. So why are they still being used?
I want the procedure banned, I want the material banned, I want surgeons to give the full information.
Just stop making it. Stop making it.
Please, it is a device of torture. And as Anne-Marie said, in the 21st century, if they were using torture to extract things, then you could use mesh as that. But please just stop. If pain takes you to a place where you feel, to me, that suicide and leaving the people behind you is less painful than them enduring watching you being in pain, then please just stop. Just don't let anybody else have to live this.